All right. I'm just going to ask before we get started if folks can see my slides here. And if they're all looking good. Okay, I got the thumbs up from a couple of people. Well, we're a few minutes past the hour, so let's go ahead and get started. My name is Meg Riley. I'm with CRD Associates, and we support ABC in all of their policy and advocacy work. So we have been working with Katie Sale to plan this upcoming Hill Day and really are excited to have you all come to DC in a couple of weeks and talk about the BRAIN initiative on Capitol Hill. Katie will be joining us. I know she's a little bit delayed, so she may jump in later and have some remarks to share, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time, so we'll go ahead and get started. So first I want to introduce the rest of the CRD team. We've been working together to get this off the ground, and I know some of you know us already, but I'll let my colleagues Nina and Lucas go ahead and introduce themselves before we get started.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nina Boyle, Senior Policy Associate at CRD. Really excited for this Hill Day and to see you all on this training today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lucas Coyle, and I'm a Policy Associate at CRD. Nice to see you all here.
Great. Thank you both. We'll walk through everything you're going to need to know in advance of the Hill Day coming up. We're happy to take some questions at the end. And also, if you have a burning question, this is kind of more of an informal training. So feel free if you want to raise your hand or speak up. We're happy to address questions along the way as well. Just to start, a couple of agenda items or really goals for this afternoon session. We want to go over a little bit what's going on in Congress and in DC right now. You may have seen some stuff in the news. There's a lot happening in health policy that we want to make sure everyone's on the same page about. We'll talk about sharing your stories, whether it be research or patient advocacy. That's always a very important component in Capitol Hill Days. We'll, of course, go over the asks that we'll be making in support of the BRAIN initiative. We will walk through successful Hill meetings, and we'll talk a bit about logistics before we get into Q&A. And I want to say, I know we have folks joining the Hill Day from all levels of experience. So maybe you've done a few congressional meetings. Maybe it's your day job to do government affairs. So we have all levels of experience. This is going to be a pretty high-level training. Know that if you're on the beginner side, you're going to be grouped together with other colleagues and advocates on the day of the Hill Day, so everyone can work together and kind of learn from the more experienced advocates. And I'll also say that if you think you need more in-depth advocacy training, ABC did just host 2 advocacy trainings with us at CRD last week, and I know those recordings are available through ABC. We're also recording this session today, so if you feel like you need to review things again or see the slides again, that will be made available and sent around tomorrow, and we'll be able to send that to folks who weren't able to attend this afternoon. All right, so let's sort of just start with a bit of an advocacy 101. Starting with why do we do a Hill Day? And there's a lot of reasons why an organization will gather its members to go up to Capitol Hill. First and foremost, education and awareness. Most legislators and their staff are really not experts in brain health. They're not experts in biomedical research. They may not even be experts in health policy. Sometimes in a House office, the health policy legislative assistant might also be the education policy, the agriculture policy, and the veterans policy person. So while they're working on these issues every day, how much expertise are they really able to gain when their portfolio is that wide? So it is really important that you bring that expertise to the Hill and make your issue rise above other issues that they're hearing about day to day. Also, it's an important time to influence the policies and funding priorities that offices have. I mean, by hearing from advocates, that helps shape the opinions, the positions of different offices. ABC, as a national organization, makes specific funding and policy requests to Congress. So Hill Day provides this point in time and that opportunity to come together and advocate for those policies. Very, very importantly, relationship building. These face-to-face meetings with policymakers and staff really help establish ongoing connections, ongoing dialogue. We learn who might be ripe to champion an issue We know who to keep coming back to. We know who needs maybe more persuasion, which also means we need to keep going back to an office. But having those relationships, making that connection with the staffer so that they recognize you next time is really very important as well. And then last, visibility for our issues. In addition to the Hill Day, we're going to be doing a briefing on the BRAIN initiative. We're going to be talking to congressional staff and have a really expert panel there. There will be a lot of staff hearing from us and hearing about the BRAIN initiative that day, and that's really important to have. All right, well, let's talk about current dynamics, everybody's favorite topic of the day, of the moment. It's true, it's a challenging time on Capitol Hill and in Washington, D.C., really across the board, but specifically to health policy. There are a lot of things going on that have bearing on our appropriations requests. Though I will say we are going to be on the Hill talking about FY26 funding and authorization for the BRAIN initiative. A lot of the other stuff might filter in, might come up during your meetings. You might have questions. So we want to make sure folks are aware and as a group, are able to field those questions, but also not to let these things become distraction for your advocacy for the BRAIN initiative. So talk a little bit about the challenges that are here and that we're experiencing, but also emphasize that we want to make sure to know that we're here on the Hill to advocate for the BRAIN initiative, and the other stuff, while it may factor in, is not part of our top line messaging. So a couple of things that I just want to make sure everyone is aware of in this landscape. First of all, the recent restructure efforts across the Department of Health and Human Services. They were first announced the last week of March, and then a number of layoffs and reductions in force were instituted on April 1st at the beginning of this month. The goal, according to the secretary, is to reduce the workforce of NIH by 20,000 employees, including previous departures as well as RIFs, and that includes 1,200 employees from NIH, So we will, we are seeing administration attempts to whittle down the federal workforce, to put an end to certain programs and certain offices. And remember, when we're talking to Congress, Congress has an oversight responsibility over the, how the structure of departments and agencies. So this may be something that you get questions about. And I think it's fair to be prepared to answer and say, the work done at NIH is very important. The research that they support is very important. And the expertise that is there is really key in making progress to, find treatments and cures for diseases of the brain, but also to make sure the meeting doesn't get off track and like swirl into some big conversation about administrative actions. So keep that in mind. Another thing that you may get asked about is the administration's proposed cap on facilities and administration costs for NIH grants. We know that that's been proposed at a 15% cap, but also challenged in court. If you're asked about this, it's also perfectly fair to talk about how important facilities and administration costs are, and that they really support the activities in an institution that make the research possible, like infrastructure of your lab, security, IT, animal care. Like I said, these staffers aren't always experts. So when you can answer those questions, that's helpful, but you also want to get back on track for our congressional asks and our goals in those offices. So the last thing I'll mention on current dynamics is last week, it was reported in the news, and a lot of us have seen this leaked, quote, pass back document from the Office of Management and Budget. And for those who haven't seen it, basically what that is during the administration's budgeting process, the departments go back and forth with the Office of Management and Budget in crafting the administration's budget proposal. So a component of that negotiation was leaked, and it does propose some deep cuts, as we might expect from this administration and what we've seen already, to funding throughout HHS, including about a 40% cut in funding for NIH. And it also proposes a restructuring of NIH, which we have seen recently, particularly last year, from a few members of Congress, efforts like this to consolidate the 27 institutes and centers together to a smaller number of institutes and centers. So notably for our areas, it proposed a new National Institute on Neuroscience and Brain Research, which would comprise NINDS, the National Eye Institute, and the National Institute of Dental and Craniofacial Research, and also proposed a new National Institute of Behavioral Health that would include NIAA, NIDA, and NIMH. So again, I don't want folks to get bogged down or expect that you need to make any presentations or have talking points on these items, but I want you to know that that's part of the landscape and questions may come up. I know a lot of folks who work in this day-to-day are helping serve as group leaders on the Hill Day, so we'll be able to anticipate some of these questions and help keep the conversation moving. And I know we're going to go over this when we talk about successful meetings, but if you do get questions in your meetings that you don't know the answer to, the best answer is I don't know, and I will follow up, and ABC can help facilitate that. So now that's a lot about what's going on in the administration. Here's a little refresher on Congress. This is mostly, I just want to stop on this slide just to point out the ratios of Republicans to Democrats in the two chambers. As everyone knows, Republicans have the majority in both the House and the Senate, but it's really, really a slim majority in both chambers. Particularly on the House, there are 220 Republicans, 213 Democrats. There are 2 vacancies for democratically held seats where the member recently passed away. So those will be replaced at some point via special election. But for any measure to pass on the House floor, the House Republican Conference really needs to be united to get those 218 votes required for passage. And we know there are a range of personalities within the Republican Conference. So they have to satisfy both, moderate Republicans who are in close districts and are going to be up for re-election in a couple of years, and then the very far right Freedom Caucus. So it's really hard for Speaker Johnson to unite everyone and pass legislation on the floor. In the Senate, it's a 53 to 47 majority for the Republicans, but also please remember that most legislation, including appropriations legislation, requires 60 votes in the Senate. So the Senate typically will undergo a really bipartisan process in legislating, including appropriations, and we can expect to see appropriations legislation from them that may be bipartisan, whereas in the House, much like last year in the fiscal year 25 process, they produced some pretty partisan bills. So there are 2 types of legislation, and the reason I wanted to take a minute to talk about the 2 is because both types of legislation really have bearing on the BRAIN Initiative and funding for the BRAIN Initiative in the next few fiscal years. Authorization legislation creates, expands, or changes federal programs or agencies or functions. It can authorize Congress to spend money on something, but typically that money needs to then be appropriated through the appropriations process. Authorizing legislation usually comprises a specific time frame, and then it will sunset, allowing Congress to go back periodically and revisit it, and then potentially renew or reauthorize. On the appropriation side, this is a process that happens every year. The federal fiscal year runs from October 1st through September 30th. And this is the legislation that actually confers budget authority on federal departments or agencies and where Congress allocates the money for its certain priorities. So when I say both have bearing on the BRAIN Initiative, we know that the 21st Century Cures Act authorized the BRAIN Initiative back in 2016, and it set out a schedule of 10 years of mandatory funding, and we're getting towards the end of that. So while we talk about appropriations for BRAIN Initiative, we will also talk about extending the authorization, and we'll get into that a little bit more deeply when we talk about the asks. And then last thing in our Congress 101 kind of advocacy refresher, this is just a slide showing us the appropriations process and exactly how it works step by step every single year, right? No, it never works like this. I think probably the last time it did was sometime in the 1990s. So instead of saying this is the step-by-step process, I'll say it's the framework of the appropriations process and kind of the image of the goals that the Appropriations Committee and Congress are working towards. Again, agencies will submit a budget to OMB, and that budget is finalized and released by the president in February. We haven't seen a budget in February in the last few years. We obviously did not see a budget this February. We do expect to see some version of the president's budget, maybe a scaled back version in the next week or two. And we do know from that leaked document I was talking about where the administration stands on its budgeting priorities, at least to the point where they were passing that back and forth. But that may change when it's formally released. We'll also say that the president's budget is not binding and never has been. Congress makes appropriations. They go through this process to make those final decisions. A lot of what is going on in terms of the administration rescinding, cutting back funding, restructuring, Congress again has an oversight role in that. So we will see how they address it throughout the appropriations process and what might be included in the House and Senate bills when they get to them. Right now, we're at the point where the committees are taking priorities from members of Congress and stakeholders are weighing in. So it's a really great timing for ABC to have this Hill Day the first week of May. The committee deadline for members of Congress to share their priorities with the committee is towards the end of the month of May. So that's when they'll have gotten all their input and they'll start to move towards writing the bill, holding subcommittee markups, holding full committee markups, and then potentially bringing bills to the floor in the later summer or early fall. Not every bill will go to the floor potentially, and I think we can really anticipate that the process will not be done by September 30th, and we'll need to see at least one CR or a series of CRs. And the way things are going between Congress and the administration, there's always threat of a government shutdown when we get towards the end of the fall or at the beginning of the fall. So that's it on kind of the advocacy refresher. Let me defer to my colleague Nina to talk a bit about sharing stories.
Thanks, Meg. Hi, everyone. So yes, now we'll transition into how to share your story. Again, we know there's a variety of experience on this call. Many of you are very experienced advocates and know how important it is to how to share your story. This will just kind of level set us and be a refresher for those who are familiar. Next slide, please. Awesome. Okay, so while we can provide you, with the background for the Hill Asks, it's really your personal and professional experience. It's really your personal and professional experience that bring to life these asks and make them memorable. So think about how you want to frame your message. How will you introduce yourself? And think about how you weave your personal story into the federal funding ask. It's also really important to make it local when possible. So we'd really encourage you to connect the dots between how policy decisions made in DC and how do they connect to the real world outcomes for people back home in districts or states. If you are meeting with your representative, this is your opportunity to talk about how the asks connect to real people back home, how they connect to your community and you. So really emphasize here that effective advocacy strategies combines both the data and how that connects to your personal stories, whether you're a patient advocate or you're on the research side. Sharing your lived experience will help policymakers see that human impact behind their policy decisions. Also, and I think this applies to things outside of advocacy too, right? Sharing a well-told story can help break down really complicated topics and make it easier for legislators to understand and grasp what you're talking about. So in our case, you might be explaining, a complex brain disease or condition and describing how that condition can be debilitating or how specific research or a specific program has improved the burden of that condition will help legislators understand the issue better. It's also important to note here, I think, that you want to keep your explanations short and simple, right? Some staffers, like Meg mentioned, they may be really familiar with brain health. It may be the main subject of their portfolio, but that's not always the case. So it's important to keep the science digestible to the average non-scientist. So again, kind of a good blueprint to go by is, share your story, share how the asks affect you, your community, and the people you're representing. Next slide, please. Awesome. Okay, so let's build a little bit more on how to make your case local when it comes to brain advocacy. Or to share just the state-specific impact. So some of your meetings will be with your own members of Congress. So in those meetings, it's really important to demonstrate during your advocacy how funding for the BRAIN initiative translates on the state or district level for constituents. You all represent, a number of brain groups, and you are the experts in these meetings when it comes to lived experience with a specific brain disease or condition or the research behind it. And so on this slide, we've highlighted some examples of state level brain statistics that will help bolster your personal story and demonstrate how conditions or diseases impact your legislators' constituents. These types of things will be very familiar to the experienced advocates on the call, but again, just to level set and for a refresher to those who are less familiar. Some powerful data that you might want to share during your meetings will include the prevalence or incident rates, mortality rates. There's a significant Medicaid or Medicare population. Ultimately, sharing that the data sharing data that is relevant, trusted, and powerful is where you want to stay. If you're looking for additional resources, you can look at trusted sources, but like the CDC, your state health departments, your fellow patient advocacy groups, or journals. Again, share data that is powerful and trusted. That's where you want to stick with. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's expand a little bit more on how you could frame the ask from the jobs and economy angle at the local level. So as many of you are well aware, NIH supports the US economy by driving and sustaining local economies. Based on a 2024 study by the group United for Medical Research in 2024, NIH grants generated $95 billion in economic activity in 2024. They supported almost 408,000 jobs nationwide, and each dollar in awards translated to a return on investment of $2.56, which is just an amazing return on investments when you think about it. This data is nationwide, of course, but the study also provides state level NIH statistics. I think this really demonstrates that not only is NIH the world, and you can talk about this in your meetings, not only is NIH the world's premier health research agency driving all of these scientific advances that are saving lives and improving our outcomes, but NIH is also an economic powerhouse. It's creating jobs and it's fueling economic activities in communities across the country. So if you or your colleagues have been or are currently recipients of NIH funding, really share, how that funding impacts your work and the consequences of the recent administrative actions that Meg was talking about, how those have impacted your work. Ultimately, I really want to underscore here that the past two slides have focused on a lot of concrete numbers and statistics, and that may be very state specific, but the bottom line here is that the data, any data that you add, is to supplement and complement your personal story. You want to deliver the asks and weave in your personal story as best as you can. Like that first slide that I was talking on said, the data makes you credible, but your story makes you memorable. And I'll turn it over to our next slide now.
Sorry, I just had a moment where the slides just rearranged themselves, so apologies for that brief interruption. And Nina, thanks. And I'll also emphasize that if you're representing a larger organization and maybe you don't have a personal story, that using other stories that you've collected from your membership, patient advocates, and researchers that you represent is also really important as well. So let's talk about the congressional asks a bit, the meat of our meetings. Oh, I'm having a little technical difficulty here because my screen, here we go. Sorry about that. Hopefully we can see the first ask here. So our first ask, and again, both of our two asks are related to the BRAIN initiative. Our first ask is about the appropriations process, where we are calling on Congress to restore funding to $680 million in FY26 for the BRAIN initiative. It'll be really important. A lot of offices won't know some of the details or the new discoveries of the BRAIN initiative. It'll be helpful to share those, but they should be familiar with the concept of the BRAIN initiative, at least because we are meeting with folks from the Appropriations Committee and from the relevant authorizing committee. Note that a lot of times and in past fiscal years, we've been requesting increased funding for the BRAIN initiative. And this year we're requesting to restore funding to the BRAIN initiative. It's a little bit, wonky, but while it is an increase, we want to make the point that BRAIN initiative has gotten this much support from Congress before, and we're just asking them to get to that level again. I'm going to show a chart on the next slide that shows kind of the history of BRAIN initiative funding. But the important thing here is that the BRAIN initiative gets two sources of funding: discretionary appropriations and mandatory funding from the 21st Century Cures Act. In FY23, there was a really big injection of funding for the 21st Century Cures Act. And so the appropriators said, and I can go to that chart right now, and you can see in the 2023 line, the pink represents 21st Century Cures and the blue represents base discretionary funding. So the base discretionary funding had been going up over the course of 8 or so years. And then the previously mapped out schedule by the 21st Century Cures bill had this big injection of funding in 2023, which was great. And it allowed Cures funding to jump up. Appropriators scaled back the discretionary funding because they didn't need that much, and there was still going to be an increase for the program. But then look, in FY 2024, there's much less pink or 21st Century Cures funding made available. And at that time, there were significant budget challenges in Congress. They were working under budget caps and very small allocations, and the appropriators could not or were not able to increase discretionary base funding to keep the BRAIN initiative level. So it suffered this big cut in FY24. FY25, which is the current fiscal year, we're operating under a CR, which extended discretionary funding at current levels. But there was another scheduled cut to the 21st Century Cures funding. So BRAIN funding did drop down again. Now, we will supply talking points. You'll have all this information available, and I don't want to make you think you need to memorize all of this math. We'll put these charts in the leave behinds as well. But the main point is, when you're making these asks, due to a precipitous drop in scheduled 21st Century Cures funding and no additional base discretionary funding, BRAIN initiative has suffered significant cuts in past fiscal years, which impedes their ability to support very important grant opportunities for groundbreaking research. And so we are asking Congress to do all it can to increase discretionary funding and therefore restore BRAIN initiatives to the $680 million mark. In past years, the Senate has been able to propose restoring funding through designating additional funding for BRAIN as emergency spending. The House has not taken that approach. So the last year's House spending bill would have flat funded BRAIN or instituted this 21st century cut with the same flat amount of discretionary funding. So we've seen both approaches, and of course we were advocating for Congress to provide as much funding as possible. The second part of the BRAIN initiative ask really gets to the crux of the falling 21st Century Cures funding. So in 2016, when 21st Century Cures was passed, it was really groundbreaking that this legislation understood and enacted that we could really make great discoveries in terms of brain health and also technologies that are really changing the research world. if they set out this 10 years funding stream to dedicate work on that. And that has been really great. It was a really important and groundbreaking effort. But as we get to the end of that 10 years, it's not as if we've unlocked all the mysteries of the brain at this time. We've made a lot of progress, but we cannot stop now. And FY26 is the last year where there will be dedicated funding from 21st Century Cures to the BRAIN Initiative. This slide shows a few different programs that were provided funding through 21st Century Cures, and you can see BRAIN is the second column here in the middle. There will be 195 million allocated through 21st Century Cures in 2026, which is an increase over the 2025 numbers. So that's something to look forward to, but it does not bring us up to, the high level mark where we want to be at for BRAIN funding. And that is the last year where that funding is legislated out and in statute. So we need to have these conversations with authorizers, and groups will be meeting with some members of the Energy and Commerce Committee to really first thank them for their support and passage of 21st Century Cures and talk about how important that has been in the area of brain research and discovery, but also emphasize that we can't stop now in fiscal year 2026. We need to build on this, and we really need Congress to consider reauthorizing and creating more funding opportunities for the BRAIN Initiative. So let's talk a little bit specifically about how to hold a successful Hill meeting. So to do that, I'm going to pass it over to Lucas.
Thank you, Meg. So for many of you, this will sound pretty familiar if you have been in Hill meetings, but this is always a good refresher. So once you enter the office and get settled with the group, really the first thing you want to do is thank the staff member for taking the time to meet with the group. Then the group leader should set the time expectation and know how much time the staffer has to discuss asks, because this will greatly influence, how you effectively deliver your asks and how you tell your story. So the group leader should then introduce the group and provide an opportunity for the Hill staffer to introduce themselves as well. And then this should be followed by an introduction of who the American Brain Coalition is and what it does. And just so you know, we'll be including this in your materials, so you have the run of show to reference. And as we've already mentioned before, many of you will be meeting with experienced health staffers, but they may not exactly be familiar with ABC or the BRAIN Initiative. So it's very important upfront to ask and learn what their familiarity is with the issue, and that can also provide some further insight into their support as well. Also, make sure you do your homework first. You could do a quick search of the staffer's LinkedIn page or history with the legislator's office, which might tell you about their areas of specialty and the content of their legislative portfolio. Then you really want to frame your request. So help them understand the importance of why you are in the meeting. And as Nina has so thoroughly described, this is where your personal story will come into play and shine, and how the work impacts the community. So this will be a good transition into delivering your asks, which will be restoring funding for the BRAIN Initiative and authorize additional long-term investment. Now, while the staffer may stop you throughout your conversation to ask specific questions, you also really want to make sure that you save some time at the end for questions. And then finally, follow up with information on any questions that they may have asked, and thank them for meeting. Next slide, please. So what to keep in mind for your meetings. Now, typically meetings are about 20 minutes on average, although again, a staffer may tell you upfront that they may only have a certain amount of time for the meeting, even if it's scheduled differently. So sometimes it'll be the full 30, sometimes it'll be just 10 minutes. So it's really important to identify that at the start of the meeting. As many of you have done this before know, you'll most likely be meeting with the office staffers rather than the congressman, and that is completely normal. There may be some cases where you won't meet in the office and you will instead be meeting in the hallway. But this doesn't change how you should deliver your ask and story. You may just have to deal with some additional distractions. Um, and also the tone should be very, conversational. This is not really a presentation. There's no need to be scared of the staffers. They want to hear from you, their constituents, and it's really their job to listen and ask you questions. This is your opportunity to educate the staff about the American Brain Coalition and the importance of federal investment in brain research. So it's going to be very important to be concise and stay on topic. And you should also remember that these are not political meetings, and this isn't a place to talk about any campaigns, financial contributions, or you say whether you did or didn't vote for the member. And again, please welcome questions. If they ask something that you can't answer, that's the perfect opportunity to follow up with them and answer and keep the dialogue and relationship going with the office. The follow-up is not only an opportunity to share your ask again, it's an opportunity to share items that you promised during the meeting. And of course, ABC can help you with any follow-up. Next slide, please. So next, let's talk about logistics for the Hill Day. So first and foremost, if you have any questions, please reach out to Katie Sale or Sheila Stern, and they will get you squared away. And once all the meetings are finalized, we will share your group assignments and then send preliminary emails to groups on Monday, May 5th. You'll also be getting an e-packet, which will have all the talking points for the meetings, the leave behind documents for the staffers, bios of the members, and then information on the staff that you are meeting with. You should really use the talking points as an outline, refine them, and also refine your story. Now, on Tuesday, May 6th, you'll be getting a more detailed schedule that will include some of the key information about your meetings, and you will also be getting an Outlook calendar appointment for each of your meetings, so you can have that handy. Then the morning of the Hill Day, on Wednesday the 7th, we'll be meeting at the CRD office at 8 a.m., where you'll meet with your group and receive your physical materials. And there will also be some breakfast available for you to grab. Just a note that CRD can store some luggage for those traveling, but just know that nobody is going to be in the office until after the Hill briefing at 4 p.m. So from the office, then you'll be traveling with your group to Capitol Hill for your meetings. Then after your meetings, you'll go ahead and travel to the Capitol Visitor Center in room 268 for the briefing. And some of you will finish your meetings well before the briefing, and some of you may have a meeting, ending at 1:30. But either way, you will have plenty of time to make it over there. Next slide, please. And we're happy to take any questions.
I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing so we can see each other as we answer questions. And also wanted to follow up on what Lucas said about luggage. We're happy to store your luggage at CRD and emphasize, if you haven't been to the Hill or done this before, they do have restrictions on the size of bags you can bring in, and especially in the Capitol Visitor Center, where we'll be having the briefing at the end of the day. So you can't bring a full-size suitcase. So please be mindful of that. We'll be going straight back to the CRD office right after that briefing so we can help everyone get in and collect their luggage. But if you have a flight right after that, you may have to think of some alternatives. So you can reach out to Katie and Sheila and we'll brainstorm with them on that. And speaking of Katie, I see that she's been able to join us. So before we get into questions, maybe see if Katie has any remarks that she wants to share.
Yes, thank you. No, I'm glad. I do want to open it up to questions because I'm sure folks do. I'm just thrilled with the turnout for this event. It's going to be really great. Mark sends his regards. He's traveling right now, so wasn't able to participate as well. But it's really important. We are thrilled to be on the Hill and being able to advocate for brain initiative funding, which is so important. If it feels like it's overwhelming and the ask is a lot, it's hard to remember this brain initiative funding going up and down and whatnot. There will be, every group will have folks that are really know this front and back. pretty well, so can answer any specific questions that come up. So don't be worried about that. It's really a chance for you to be there to tell your personal story and to really show that the larger brain community is really dedicated to this, because we do have folks that are professionals, researchers, clinicians, and then those with lived experience, patient advocacy groups, disease specific groups. So it's really exciting to have you all. So with that, I'm going to let folks answer questions. I had a little bit I wanted to ask, but I'm going to see if others ask questions first.
Yeah, and I'll just say, feel free to jump in, raise your hand, whatever is easiest. We can be casual. So
I have two quick ones. What's recommended dress code? Is it formal? And then the second one is for the small group meetings. How many do they see a day? Are they like, another one? Is their mindset going into this? I have 10 of these a day. Is this one a day? Like, what's their mindset?
these are good questions. So yeah, dress professionally. It doesn't have to be a full, 3-piece suit or whatever, but a jacket, or, for women, pants and blazer or a dress. Your version of professional might not be the same. There's a range, but just go in there looking professionally.
But comfortable shoes.
Yes, and comfortable shoes. Thank you, Katie. There
Because you
will be
may
a
be
lot of
walking.
walking. And we're gonna try and consolidate, and I hat tip to Lucas because he's working on the jigsaw puzzle of the schedules, which is really hard. We're gonna try and consolidate, like if you have house meetings, you mostly have house meetings, or you mostly have Senate meetings, but there will be some groups that are gonna have to go back and forth from the House to the Senate, which is a couple blocks of a walk. Hopefully the weather is good. Your group leader also might be able to get an intern to take you through the train if you're on a tight schedule. But yes, comfortable shoes is a great idea. To your other question, John, they do have a lot of these meetings. I won't sugarcoat. There are certain offices that, yes, they might have them every 20 minutes on the 30-minute or 20-minute increment throughout most of the day. So they hear a lot of these similar types of conversations. And that's really the reason why we think emphasizing your personal story is so important in these meetings, because that is how you can best stand out. If everyone goes in and they have 5 meetings in a row where everyone is reciting the data and the statistics that they know, that's going to be a blur by the end of the day. But if you are able to share some really compelling research or really compelling personal story, that will stick with the staff, and that will be really helpful in making the case. Julianne you have your hand up.
And I'm sorry if I missed it last week. I was out. How are you determining who goes where? Because oftentimes you do it by constituency, but like,
yeah.
And I'm sorry if it's a repeat, but can you explain that a little bit?
No, it's not a repeat, and it's a good question, because often when it's a bigger group like patient advocacy or a whole research society, people will go with their state groups and they'll go to places where they're constituent of. For ABC, when we bring in the leadership and the advocacy committee, we instead request meetings with targeted members of Congress. So like I said, we're requesting meetings with Labor HHS members, the Appropriations Subcommittee, as well as some Energy and Commerce members. And so it's a little bit different. We have taken note of where individuals live. So if there's someone representing that state, it might not be your actual member of Congress. Maybe it's your senator, maybe it's a neighboring district in the House. We're taking note of those instances. So if you're coming in from out of town, there likely may be someone from back home that's on your meeting list. But we are not scheduling it such that everyone is going to have their 3 meetings with their 2 senators and their representative. And then really, Julianne, how we've done it is just put 4 or 5 groups together and then try to puzzle it out so we have enough people meeting with those offices. It's not a science. It's not like really refined, but we know, these are all appropriations or authorizing folks under the jurisdiction of these asks. And so we've tried to make kind of diverse groups and get them in there. But other than geography, there's not really a method to the madness.
And again, thank you. That's helpful. And totally understand how it's a different dynamic than the other. But just to make sure we get enough time to know who we're meeting with, to do the background and all that. And I'm sorry, I should have written down the timeline. Can you either show the slide again or tell me exactly which, because I had 2 days booked on my calendar, but I didn't do a great job of protecting them. Can you tell me?
So, yeah, of course. And I'll start with sort of the timeline because it also speaks to some of your question on when you'll receive materials. So just to emphasize kind of what Lucas shared, we will have all the materials out to you by that Monday, and the meetings are Wednesday. So hoping you'll have, overnight, 2 nights to review and make sure you're familiar. And of course, we welcome questions. So Monday, the materials, and I think we'll send you the schedule. We sort of said we'll send the Outlook appointments on Tuesday. You guys know this, who do this day to day, like these meetings can change up to the last minute. So we try to not send the schedule and get people like kind of committed and then it changes. So Monday we'll give the materials and the basics of the schedule, the bios of who you're meeting with, what information we can gather on the staff. Tuesday we'll send Outlook appointments, presuming that by Tuesday at least the meetings will be confirmed. And yes, you may have been holding both Tuesday the 6th and Wednesday the 7th for the Hill Day. We've consolidated it, based on folks' availability and the fact that the briefing is on the 7th. We're going to do all the meetings the morning and afternoon, early afternoon of the 7th into the briefing. So that'll be the big in-person day. We'll start at 8 a.m. with breakfast at CRD, and then move to Hill meetings and then to the briefing that afternoon. Is that helpful? Does that have the information you need?
Yes, very helpful. Thank you.
And apologies because you maybe missed that. And if anyone else missed it as well, that we ended up changing it to just the 7th. So not the 6th and the 7th anymore. So apologies for that. I tried to communicate it out, but for those of you, it's a good time to say, for those of you who are coming into town, let me know if you're arriving earlier, in the evening and wish to get together. Let me know that, but no pressure. And then for those of you, while I'm at it, for those of you who are in town, if you could meet at CRD offices, it would be really helpful because what we're hoping is that we can have time to kind of meet in our little groups to go over, I'm going to say this, I'm going to do this. And while CRD is going to do a great job of, doing a little outline of each, each person, what am I trying to say, Meg?
Like a run of show. We're going to
run of show.
provide a bit of a run of show with the talking points, but we're not going to assign you what to say. So I think, Katie, that's what you're trying to say. You can
Yes.
meet each other and discuss kind of who might have what role.
Yes, exactly.
I will ask one more question if nobody else is going to, but I want to pause.
I think we can go ahead.
This is just more about the dynamics because I know that on the Hill, they're kind of going through the process as normal and they have, like the NIH as it exists with the 30 or the 27 institute, you know what I mean? But I guess I've struggled and it's come out a little bit differently every time, how to just say, but for the record, what's happening is not normal. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like you don't want to be, but I'm just curious if you have any advice on that. Cause I think the meetings I leave without saying something, I feel like, you know what I mean? But I also don't want to be cryptic, and I'm just curious how you guys have been doing that.
Yeah, that's a great question, Julianne. And it's one of the reasons that we wanted to spend some time on that earlier slide about what are the things that are going on and what bearing does that have on the asks. I don't want the group to get bogged down in making this a trip to the Hill to talk about all the things that are wrong with various things that are happening. We want to be focused on the BRAIN initiative, but I absolutely hear what you're saying. And I do think it's important to acknowledge just overall the importance of NIH and, the expertise they have, the research that they support. And I think it's totally fair as you go into these meetings, and we can even include some example recommendations in the talking points to say, like ABC supports the National Institutes of Health, and individually these institutes are very important in doing this research, and collectively they're the world's largest biomedical research institutions. I think that just some high level talking points on the importance of these of NIH specifically, but HHS more generally and the federal workforce that supports the research enterprise is really important. We're happy to put a couple of thoughts on paper that might support you in saying that. And I think, you might get questions like, what's the impact if NIH is cut, for example, 40%, like has been proposed in the budget? And I think, you can answer those questions honestly. There are so many meritorious research proposals, and if NIH doesn't have the funding to support those, we're just losing opportunities to find treatments and cures. So it is a really tough time to be on the Hill with everything going on. And we totally recognize that and want to, provide whatever supports we can as you head up there. So we'll keep that in mind.
And I'll just lastly underscore the point you made about not everybody being an expert. One thing I've heard a lot is like, especially the Republican offices are really understaffed, and lots of them have like multiple people trying to balance, to cover the health. So anyway, just to underscore what you said, I think it's probably even more so the case right now than usual.
No, you're right. Thanks, Julianne. I would say just blanket that Hill staff are really overwhelmed right now. There's a lot going on. There's a lot they're being asked to respond to. There's a lot they're being asked to do. And yes, in many cases, they have a lot of responsibility. And so that's another reason, to make sure these meetings are collegial, if particular policies are upsetting to you for some reason, like it's not any individual Hill staffer that's responsible for those. So these meetings are to share our priorities, to hear their questions, and just to be respectful and responsive in the questions they have. And also in, as you said, Julianne, sharing the impacts of some of these actions.
So along those lines, what I've heard in other Hill days often is that staffers who see this positively, it's an opportunity for them to be able to gather data that's particularly helpful to their, to their leader. Do you get any questions from them ahead of time that they would like to cover? Is that something that you can share with us?
Not usually. Sometimes they'll ask, what we plan to talk about, and we'll share that. If we do get questions, we will absolutely share that by the time the group heads up to the Hills, especially for the group that is scheduled for the meeting that a question may have come from. Normally the questions are more like, is there a constituent? What are you going to cover? And we can sort of answer those. If we get specific questions, we would definitely send them along.
Great.
Anyone else? Katie, I know you said you had some questions or points you might have wanted to make.
Sorry, I was managing the chat, not very effectively, by the way, because I was sending it to random people. But I do see that this is great that people are writing that they'd be interested in meeting up the evening before. So recognizing it's going to be a very early morning the next morning, so it will probably be something pretty informal. We'll look into it on our side and see if, oh yeah, John, you said 7 p.m. or earlier. Probably we'll try to do a little bit earlier, but maybe around 7. And we'll be in touch as we gather a little bit more information on that. So, and again, it'll be informal. You won't be missing anything of substance on that. But more importantly, that we'll meet up at 8 a.m. the next morning at CRD Associates. And we'll make sure that we get you there at the address for how to get there. And they're right off the Metro line, so very easy.
Yeah, we're right above L'Enfant Plaza for the local folks.
Great. And of course, we're here. I know we're at the top of the hour, but I want to say we're here for anything that you might need. And I'm saying that with the caveat that I'm leaving for the airport later today. I'm traveling to Italy, but I will, so you'll get an out of office from me through May 2nd, but I will be checking email. It'll just be at strange times when I get back to you. Sheila's also going to be checking my email, and will get a hold of me as well if it needs to be me. She knows how to get a hold of CRD. So don't worry, I'm not going to just leave you hanging for this next week. So I think with that, you know, just reach out to us with it at any time. Thank you, CRD, for laying this out for us. We've got some homework to do to get this all lined up and get these meetings scheduled for all of you, and just really appreciate you participating. It is so important and crucial during this time. So just really can't express that enough.
Yeah, thank you all.
So yes, thank you. Oh, and this is going to be recorded. So, well, I guess it doesn't matter.
Yep.
You're all on. You're all on. It doesn't matter. But Sheila will be sharing it. All right. Thanks so much. Have a good day.